What's up, guys? Tim Little. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Today's video, we are talking spring topwater, frogs, poppers, ploppers, walking baits, buzz baits. We're covering it all. Let's go. Springtime is the time you need to start thinking about tying on a topwater. Now, today's video, I'm going to cover probably 5 or 6 different styles of baits, talk about when and why, and give you my favorite baits, especially this time of year. You know, springtime, we've covered it in other videos, but springtime is kind of like a transition period with weather, right? You have storms coming in, you have water coming in, all the creeks and the rivers, wherever your water comes from. So there's a lot of influx of water, lots of different variations, elevation changes of water. But a topwater bait, once it's stable and the sun is high and it's warm enough where you don't have a sweatshirt on, a topwater is one of the most often overlooked baits to catch them this time of the year. So today I'm going to talk about, like I said, 5 or 6 different techniques, give you my favorites, when I choose the different types of baits and why. Because spring topwater is some of the most violent and aggressive fishing you'll get of the entire year. So let's start off with talking about when. You know, obviously we have viewers from all across the country, all across the world actually, but typically if you read the book of bass fishing, you know, when are you supposed to start thinking about throwing topwater, it's all based on water temp. You know, high 50s, low 60s, that's when you start throwing your topwater baits. Well, I'm here to tell you that we've caught topwater fish in the middle of winter, 40-degree water temp, 50-degree water temp. So that is kind of like, you know, take it with a grain of salt. That is like a general rule of thumb, but understand that your body of water can be completely different given the different circumstances. You know, if you're in the back of a bay and the fish have, you know, some shad or some bluegill, some baby crappie pinned up in the back and they're just grenading on them and it's early February, late January, don't be afraid to throw a topwater on those fish. Now with that said, here we are in mid-April. Guys up north, you've actually had ice thaw pretty quickly, so you might be fishing a topwater sooner than later. Guys out on the west coast, you're probably already doing it. Definitely guys in the South Florida, you're already flipping and punching, frogging. But this video, depending on where you are in the country, applies to you. Don't overthink it and don't forget about throwing a topwater right now, this time of the year. So let's talk about the baits. Real quickly, I want to talk about the baits themselves, moving baits. You know, in the fall, I will do a completely different topwater video. The reason being the water, like I said earlier in this video, the water, you have an influx of water coming in from streams and tributaries. You got different fluctuations of water temp. The water is still cooler than it will be in the fall after summer, obviously. So, day like today, it's probably 4:30, 5 o'clock. The hottest part of the day is going to be this evening right before the sun sets. You know, with that high sun heats up that, especially the surface temp, heats up the water, and that surface temp can be several degrees warmer than the rest of the water. So that is what allows those fish, even in those cold conditions, to come up and eat those bait. Plus, bass are just crazy. They are just, I've seen them do some crazy things. So you can't just kind of put them in a group, just a lump of all the other fish. They are just crazy. They are super aggressive when they want to be. But this evening, that water has had all day to warm up. So your best bet to catch topwater fish this time of the year, especially if you still have colder nights, is going to be in the evening time. Now with that said, how do you go and find where you should be throwing topwater? Typically, this time of the year, like I said, you're looking for a bay where they have baby bluegill or crappie or shad or little silver sides, that sort of thing pinned up in the back. You know, we've covered the pre-spawn, the spawn as those fish are transitioning into those spawning flats. Now you're looking for those bays where they can corral that fish and really hold them in there and just munch on them. So in the evening times, look for bait flickering on the surface. Look for little grass patches that are slowly coming up. As this water warms up, you're gonna get more and more vegetation coming up, and that's what those fish use to hide, to ambush those fish. So enough talking about when and where. Now let's talk about the baits. Right off the bat, I typically do not throw quick moving baits this time of the year because water temp and all the stuff that I just explained, I'm not trying to throw an 8-to-1 gear ratio reel and just cover miles and miles of shoreline, as fast as I can. Typically, this time of the year, I'm gonna start off with slow moving baits. My favorite bait to start off is gonna be some kind of popper. Now, hands down, my favorite popper that I messed them up on last year is gonna be this guy right here. This is the Pop Max. This is actually Matt Shad. It's a Megabass bait. It's a little pricey in terms of poppers, but what you get with this bait is not just a traditional popper, throw it out, bloop, bloop. This bait, you can actually walk it, just like you would your walking baits, but it also spits. But the benefit of throwing this bait is it's not covering a lot of distance between you and your cast. It's not coming to the boat very quickly. Now that's very important, like I said, with this time of the year, the water temp, that sort of stuff. You can have a quick moving bait, but you want it side to side. Again, you could be covering 8, 10, 12 inches laterally, but you don't want to be covering a lot of water on your cast. So a popper is great because you can fire it out there, bloop, bloop, just let it sit. Very subtle. You can be very accurate with a little popper like this. Again, if you're fishing isolated tule clumps or isolated grass patches or dock pilings, submerged brush, that sort of stuff, you can throw this bait out there and just bloop it and let it sit above those fish. Even if they're in that spawn stage, fish don't like something just sitting above them. So a popper is an awesome bait. Now, if you're looking for a popper where you're just gonna throw it out there and just bloop, bloop, like a pop-ar or a splash it, something like that works really well. Another one works really good, that little Demiki D-Pop. That's a winner. Obviously the Rico, the Yellow Magic, all of these baits have different sounds, but the benefit of, like I said, the popper is you don't have to cover a lot of water. Now with the more expensive baits, you get kind of that combination bait where you can walk it and pop it, and it just is that combination of quick movement, not a lot of distance covered, and a bubble trail and little spits and pops. That makes a popper a very special bait. Again, just like every video, guys, I will link my favorite baits down below in the video description because I definitely have my favorites and definitely have confidence baits. So that was poppers. Obviously you can see when you start getting into the higher price point, you get, of course, here comes the wind. You get those nicer, realistic looking baits. Again, if you're throwing, one thing I almost forgot about, let me show you guys this real quick. This is the little, that's the Pop X. That's the Pop Max. You can see the difference in size. This bait's a real finessey bait. You can actually throw it on a spinning rod if you want, but again, you're trying to match the hatch. If you're fishing for fish that are eating silver sides and smaller bait fish, go with something small. If you're fishing a pond or a back of a bay where they have baby crappie or bluegill pinned up, that's where you're gonna go with the bigger Pop Max. But again, a popper is probably my #1 pre-spawn and spawn topwater bait. Let's talk about walking baits. I have a couple different ones. If you guys have watched our videos in the past, you know that you need probably 2, if not 3, different walking baits. Now, the reason being, I'll talk colors at the very end. The reason being is they all have different sounds. Depending on which fishery you're on, you have to let the fish tell you which type of topwater bait they want. This is the River to Sea Rover. It's got a really good sound to it. Kind of a little bit of a deeper knock. Now let's listen to, this is the Tackle. What else do we got? Let's go with the Shower Blows. So you can see how all of those baits have different sounds. The Vixen's a very tingy, pingy bait. Again, that's the Rover. But every fishery is different, and your fish have to tell you what they like. You know, a lot of times when Matt and I are trying to figure out different fisheries, we'll be throwing completely different topwater baits. It doesn't do any good to be fishing the same baits. And you know what, more often than not, one bait will be getting eaten, you know, 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 5 to 1 versus the other bait. So that's where it's very important. Again, those are my 3 favorites. The Rover, the Tackle, and then also the Shower Blows. Now what's cool about the Shower Blows is it comes in a bunch of different sizes. But what's cool about the Shower Blows is it has a cupped face. So like I said, you know, you're not trying to cover a lot of distance. So when you're fishing a dock, let's use a dock for instance. You know, you're gonna throw shallow back to the shoreline, and you're gonna work this bait to you. You know, you don't want to just blow past the dock, right? You want this where you can hit this thing. It's just a real subtle tap, 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 your cadence. You'll have to practice it. Don't hit it too hard. Just a tap, tap, tap. And what this thing's gonna do, it's just gonna rotate on its butt. It's not gonna cover a lot of distance between you and the bank, you and the bait, but it's gonna turn side to side. Now, if that fish is on that dock piling and that bait's coming over and it's just side to side to side to side, that's what's gonna key him in. Later in the year, if it just blows by him, that's where they're gonna chase it down and just explode on it. You know, a quick moving buzz bait, something like that. But this time of the year, you know, especially the Shower Blows with that cup face, it slows that bait down. It slows it down from coming towards you, lets you hit it and just move it side to side in that real specific area. You know, those dock pilings, those laydowns, the target structure that you're trying to fish, and you don't cover a lot of water. Again, that cup face slows it down and adds spit and pop to it. And again, that is just another winner. So the Shower Blows, if you're fishing a little smaller fishery, you can go with the little this is the 105. I believe this is a 125. Yeah, 125, 105. I really like throwing this little guy right here. It's, again, you guys, this time of year is so special to be throwing topwater because you're coming out of winter, your water's warming up, and you could be the first person on your pond, on your lake, on your fishery throwing topwater. They haven't seen it all year. They haven't seen it since all the way back in fall. So if you're the first guy on them throwing topwater, chances are you're gonna catch a lot of fish and you're gonna catch the biggest fish because they haven't seen it for several months. So walking baits and poppers, hands down my 2 favorite techniques, or 2 favorite lines of topwater in this technique. Now let's talk about Whopper Ploppers. You know, Whopper Ploppers come in several different sizes. This is the 130. This is the 110. Here's the little 90. Little 75 compared to the 90. Completely different tail section on it, completely different body. But the thing is they all have different sounds. Those of you guys that follow the channel know that we were down earlier this year down in Florida, and we were throwing the Whopper Plopper, the 90. It was just a really, really subtle bait. You know, it has a completely different sound than, let's say, the 110, that little 90. But it was a very subtle bait, and it didn't overpower, wasn't too loud, and it didn't disrupt too much water, and we were catching a ton of fish on that guy right there. But this time of the year, again, it's very critical that you're not just burning this Whopper Plopper and covering yards and yards of shoreline. You want to throw it out there, plop, 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 every different size Whopper Plopper will have that different sound. You got to listen to it. The loudest it gets, you'll hear that, like, you'll have to play around with the speed of your handle turns, but you'll hear the different sounds on those Whopper Ploppers. But hands down, my favorite size to throw this time of the year is going to be the 110. It's a great combination between the 130. There's actually a 190 that's a giant size, but it's a smaller version of the 130. Has still a big cup on the back, which cups a lot more water. Again, it slows down that bait, but still makes a very good sound and commotion. The Whopper Plopper 110, if you're gonna throw a moving bait like that, very easy to fish. You fire it out there, and you just blop, 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 blop. You can pause it. You know, you can pop it if you want, but this time of the year, it's just a plop, 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 plop. As you get to those key pieces of cover, grass, lay down, shade line, dock piling, anything like that, either speed it up real quick or pop it, stop it, plop, plop, plop. Just change cadence. Just like you're throwing a glide bait, just like you're throwing a crankbait, you know, just do something a little different to make those fish think that that bait has been spotted. That is the Whopper Plopper section. It's very easy. Like I said, each size has its different sound. You're gonna have to play around with the different baits and your fishery. The 110 is my favorite bait to start off with. It just has that good size. You know, it's still got a fairly substantial profile in the water. Makes a great sound. It's not as long as the 130, so even your spotted bass and your smallmouth get it down. So we talked about poppers, we talked about walking baits, we talked about ploppers. Let's talk buzzbaits real quick, and then we will talk frogs, because you have to have a frog rigged up this time of the year. So buzzbaits kind of fall in that same kind of genre as a Whopper Plopper, but this time of the year, Matt and I, we both throw two very specific types of buzzbaits, and here's why. Double buzz, single buzz, plastic with the quad blade on it. Not the double blade, the quad blade. Again, it's all about speed. You're not trying to burn this thing back to the boat. Now, a double buzz is going to be slower than the single buzz. Try and get as light of buzzbait as possible. You know, if you're throwing a 3/4 or 1 ounce buzzbait, you got to be moving that thing quick to keep it up on plane and up on the surface. Again, you're covering a lot of water. The lightest bait you can get away with, go with that double buzz. That's going to slow that bait down. It's going to have a ton of commotion. You'll get some of the most violent strikes of the entire year on a double buzz this time of the year. Typically, they're going to be bigger fish. And then if you need to go with the single buzz, go with the quad blade. It just has more pull and more resistance and planes out easier, and you can fish it slower. It has a completely different sound than the metal blades. These are our 1-2 punches, especially this time of the year. You can run a stinger hook if you want, but you can put a little horny toad on there, your favorite swim bait, whatever it may be. But if you're gonna throw a buzz bait, one of those two, either the double buzz, go slow, or the quad plastic blade. Again, we'll link our favorites down below in the video description. Frogs. We finally made it to frogs. Frog fishing can be its own video, but if you are a pond fisherman, a lot of grass, a lot of laydowns, if you're an open water fisherman, some of the stuff doesn't really apply to you. It will later on in the year when the grass comes up and there's mats way offshore. But right now, we're talking about fishing the very backs of cuts. We're fishing docks, we're fishing creek channels, we're fishing cypress trees, we're fishing whatever it can be that those fish get up shallow and in and use for cover so they can ambush their prey. So a frog, I mean, like I said, these techniques could have their own video, and we will do in-depth videos on all of these techniques. But right now, you have to have at least one frog, maybe 2 frogs tied on. So I'm not gonna go too in-depth on frog fishing. Hopefully this wind isn't too bad, guys. I apologize. What is the purpose of throwing a frog? You know, a frog is, it's just power on power. You know, you're throwing 50, 65 pound braid straight to the bait, big old hooks, and it's power on power. You're trying to get into the thickest cover, get that bite, and get that fish out. So you need strong hooks, strong line, strong rod, and a reel with a good drag. So power on power. So this time of the year, I will always have one, if not two frogs tied on, because I never know when I'm gonna get to the very back of a cut or a grass line or something, you know, a tree, submerged tree, maybe it's only 2 inches above water. I can throw that frog right in the middle of that stuff. You know, I couldn't throw the popper in there, I couldn't throw the walking bait, couldn't throw the buzz bait, but I can throw the frog in there right on top of those fish and just walk it back and forth. You know, again, you're not covering a lot of distance, so this time of year, you're gonna want a frog that you can walk. Because a lot of you guys have, maybe not a lot of you guys, but a lot of people have trouble with walking a frog, and it's usually because they're hitting their rod tip, they're hitting it too hard and it's pulling that frog to them. Be real soft and hit it on slack line. Give yourself a little bit of slack line to hit it on, and that fish, that frog will just kick side to side. A lot of times, it'll sit there right on top of that area that you're fishing. You know, maybe a little opening in a grass mat, you know, that stick up that's popping up, whatever it may be. But you need a frog with a good keel on it to make it walk very easily. This is hands down our favorite frog. This is the River Sea, the Bullywall. It's actually color Matt and I designed. It's called Little Allen. I will get into colors in just a second as soon as we get done talking about frogs. But the Little Allen, our favorite. Again, I'll get to colors in just a second. But other frogs that work really well, not just this time of the year, but throughout the rest of the year. This little guy right here, that's the Spro. Pay attention to these colors because I like to keep it simple in all of these techniques, all these different baits. This is a poppin' frog. This is a gavacho. Now, when I said I usually have one, if not two, tied on, it's because I usually have a traditional frog and I'll have a poppin' frog. Just like the popper, I can fish this very slow, very specific cast, you know, target casts, and sit there and just bloop, bloop, right on top of those fish, right in that lay down, whatever it may be, but it's weedless. Again, good strong hooks on there, straight braid. You're gonna jack them, hit them hard, and get them out of that cover. But a poppin' frog is another bait that you have to have tied on this time of the year. So poppin' frog, that gavacho is amazing. Talked about the Spro, and then two other frogs. This one we talked about a lot the last 2 years. This is a little finesse frog. That's the little Kyara. Look how small this thing is compared to a traditional 65 size frog. A lot smaller. So this is gonna be your finesse frog. You know, a lot of times, if you're a highland reservoir fisherman with clear water, but you still have those laydowns, you still have that stuff that you can't throw a treble hook bait through, that's when you go with this guy right here. You can get away throwing this on your medium heavy. If you're going for bigger fish, go with a heavy. I'll link some favorite rods down below, but you can, because it is a smaller finesse frog, you can get away with throwing it on, you know, 50-pound braid, even 30-pound braid. But that guy is a winner. And last but not least, this is a new frog that Matt and I have been playing around with. This is actually the scum frog. And what really stands out, this frog, you know, there's a lot of tricks you can do to soften up the plastic. You know, when a fish eats a frog, a lot of times those hooks are hidden behind the ridge of the back. So you have to hit them hard. You want this plastic, you want this to be very soft because you don't want something that's really rigid in the way of getting that good hook set. Well, this thing is probably, it's got to be one of the softest frogs I've ever seen out of the package. Trim the legs, it walks really well, but that guy right there is another winner. So let's talk about colors, because if you guys go back and look at this, you'll see there's a lot of similarities in the color. Typically this time of the year, It's one of 4 colors. I keep it simple. I'm gonna go with, I'll go with the frogs just that way. I'm gonna go with a black, a white, a chartreuse, and then some kind of ghosty clear color to represent your bluegill. Something like that. That's it. Those 4 colors. You don't have to get red, blue, you don't have to do all that. But you know, in your poppers, again, go with a bluegill pattern, go with a little baitfish pattern, go with something that contrasts really well, like a dark or a white in the sun or cloud cover, and that is it, guys. That will get you set. You know, play around with the ploppers, get 1 or 2 of the different sizes, play around with your fishery. The walking baits, again, any of those 3 baits are winners. I will link, like I said, them down below in the video description, but if you can get all 3, that's awesome. You will learn which day and which fishery your fish, you know, which bait they like, and keep it very simple on your colors. Ghost, clear water, high visibility, and white, black, and chartreuse. Chartreuse is typically the color I start with. If it's not crystal clear, you get the most aggressive fish, especially on a frog. They can see it from a long ways and they don't miss it. Now, one thing I want to talk about real quick, and we'll wrap it up because this video is going long. On my walking baits, everything besides the frog, I go braid to mono leader. You know, the braid on the frog, again, straight power on power. You need to hook that fish, get it out of that heavy cover. You know, you go straight 50, 65 pound braid. Poppers, walking baits, even Whopper Ploppers, I like to put a monofilament leader. I don't want fluorocarbon, I want monofilament. Monofilament floats, but more importantly, it's more rigid than braid. You know, you move braid around, it'll just fold up and everything. When you're throwing these baits and you're walking them side to side, a lot of times that front hook will foul up in the braid. So the monofilament, 2 things. It floats, it is less visible in the water than the braid. You know, especially clear water, those fish look up, they silhouette, they see that bait, they see that shadow of the line. You don't want that. So the monofilament helps with that, but also helps with staying out of the weight of the movement of the bait. So that is a win-win. Again, frogs, buzzbaits, you can go straight braid. You're not, the buzzbait, you're not giving them a lot of time to look at it. So again, that's just power on power, but your poppers especially, and your walking baits. One other tip, those of you guys that like throwing Whopper Ploppers and you get tired of all the spin in the line, go ahead and put yourself a little swivel on there, a little Spro Power swivel, and a Hyperwire split ring. That will eliminate any of your line twist. You know, a lot of times when you're fishing this all day, you'll start getting grass or junk in that little joint, and that slows down the prop and starts spinning your bait. So at the end of the day, you can get a bunch of line twists, but adding that little swivel in the front, that will save you guys a bunch of headache and a bunch of line twists. So there it is, guys. I was hoping this video would be a lot shorter. You can kind of see what I'm dealing with, trying to minimize it for you, but simplify it for you, because this time of the year is a great time to get out, especially if you're, you know, a 9-to-5 guy. You get off work, you still have about 4 hours of sunlight. You're fishing the warmest part of the day. Those fish are gonna be moved up in the backs of cuts, backs of creek arms. Go out, throw topwater till it gets dark, guys. You guys will have some amazing success. If you guys like this video, please give us a thumbs up. Remember, I will link everything down below in the video description, because I didn't cover rods or reels or anything like that. I'll link all that stuff down below in the video description. But if you guys learned something from this video, give us a like. Remember to subscribe to the channel. We do 3 videos a week. As always, guys, we appreciate you. Have a good one.